I stare at the silent dance of the barista as she continues with her slow dance. She carefully pushes the receptacle into the slot, which then activates the coffee grinder into motion, and it grinds the coffee very fine for that perfect tiny little cup of espresso that everyone so loves. But as she does so, I notice her hands shaking during that brief moment where the machine whirs to life and she is no longer holding on to the handle. I grow curious at this fact and look up at her face. Sure enough, those telltale signs of not having slept are there, the shadows and the bags under her eyes. I shrugged, thinking that was all to it. After all, it was 8 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday. I only had to wake up, take a shower, get dressed, come here to this quaint little cafe that I was so fond of, and order the cup of coffee before I began working. But her day must have included the same waking up, getting dressed and coming to the cafe. But the difference was that she would have had to come here that much earlier and open the cafe, unflip the chairs, get everything in order, make sure the food items were all set, and then welcome the first customer in. Normally, that customer was myself. But today was a weekend, so I slept in till a bit later. I treat myself to these luxuries once in a while after all. But before I could fall back into my thoughts, my senses noticed something wrong again. It pulled me out of the initial stages of my reverie, and I focused upon what had by now been pushed to the periphery of my vision, the barista's arm. It was a curious fact that even though it was a hot day today, and though I was dressed in a suit anyway because I happened to like it, this particular barista was wearing a shirt with long sleeves despite having always been dressed in a t-shirt with short sleeves otherwise. The customary attire of the cafe, I believe. And despite her imperceptible trembling, she was continuously trying to pull the sleeves further down when she felt she was not being watched, as though making sure to cover something. I subsequently focused my entire attention on that part of her body, trying to figure out why she was doing so. Might she be actually feeling cold on this day? Of course, the air conditioner was working and one of the vents was directly above her, but that had always been the case. She should have acted such a few times before as well during all these months that I had been coming here. Maybe she was coming down with the flu, due to which this particular behavior had taken shape. Or maybe it was because she was having a tattoo made, and at that moment it was still in its infancy and therefore maybe even hurting that part of her skin, and as yet she was not really keen on showing it to anyone. I kept imagining different scenarios in my mind, some pleasant as could be in this situation, others quite gruesome, but all of them within the realm of possibility, according to my understanding at the very least. And it was while I was still considering these scenarios that I drifted into yet another reverie when suddenly, while she was still pouring the shot into the tiny cup that was to constitute my morning drug, I saw it. It was only for a fraction of a second, but there was no denying it. A clear, light red cut perpendicular to the veins running within the arm. It peeked out of the sleeve before it went back in like a frightened mouse. And having glimpsed it, my brain began on overdrive. Could it be that she had been on the receiving end of a violent crime? Could it have been that she was the victim of domestic abuse? Or maybe even a drunken assault by a family member or other? I tried to think of all possibilities equally, but however much I tried, I was continuously being pushed to consider one possibility above all others. She had tried to slit her own wrist and commit suicide. I was still enraptured by that visage and was wondering why someone of such beauty would have wanted to do something like that. I have always believed that the grass is always greener on the other side, but if the hypothesis of her having tried to commit suicide was correct, then my prior assumption of her having a life that other people would have done much for would have turned out to be utterly false. In my own case as well, since even though I was not perfect, and I know most of my shortcomings and therefore could easily claim that I was heavily flawed, at least I had never contemplated suicide, and while standing there, with my mind on overdrive, in the pit of my stomach I felt a guilt and longing to help her. "Excuse me?" I heard from far away, and I felt someone tap at my shoulder. I blinked out of my daydream and turned around to see a man behind me pointing towards the coffee machine. When I had turned my gaze around, I saw the barista looking at me. Our eyes locked for the briefest of moments, and even though there was no reason to think so, I knew instinctively that she knew I had seen the scar and that I had figured it all out. And in her shame, she lowered her eyes and looked away while still holding the cup and the saucer out towards me. I wanted to say something. I wanted to extend an arm and hold her and say that it would be all right, that good times would come. I opened my mouth and began extending my arm, and I thought that I was finally going to do it. I was finally going to say something more than mere pleasantries. But I was just fooling myself. "Thank you very much," were the only words that escaped my mouth, and the arm that I had thought was going to embrace her stopped way short of its mark, just enough to allow grabbing a hold of the saucer and taking the load from her. I nodded my head, even though she was not looking, and with my insides screaming, I turned around. I cursed myself as I took each step away and towards my table. The barista was looking for help, and all I could do was offer a thank you, and that was all. I died inside that day.